Hello and welcome to our Gulf Coast Confidential Deep Dive. I'm your host, Molly Barrows, with co-host Pam Hill, and we appreciate you joining us tonight live here on Facebook as well as our Gulf Coast Confidential YouTube channel. You know, each month we dive into a live conversation on topics that we cover on our weekly podcast, and we would love it if you would like and subscribe, of course, to our podcast, Gulf Coast Confidential. You can watch on the YouTube channel or listen to wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. And of course, we want to hear your questions too. And tonight we hope you're bringing a lot of them because we have the special honor of having Pensacola personal injury attorney Joe Zarzaur joining us today. He recently won a $50 million verdict in a case of negligence of attempted murder. It surrounds a case of attempted murder at a Pensacola senior apartment complex. And it's not just this crime that was so shocking. It was the fact that it could have been prevented. And, you know, we are big fans of Joe Zarzaur on this show. And we appreciate his support. But mostly we just love the fact that he fights for victims.
I do. I like somebody that'll go in there and have a purpose and go in there and go, right makes might. I'm right.
Exactly. And I think so many people, until they're injured through no fault of their own, through whatever circumstance, they don't realize that they need them. Because if you don't have an advocate for you in the civil world of civil law, if you will, then you could be definitely up a paddle without a creek, so to speak. So we want to go ahead and dive right in. Joe won a $50 million verdict on behalf of a man who was shot 6 times in this incident, but thankfully he survived. And following 4 years of litigation, 4 years and a week-long trial prosecuted by Zarzaur Law in Escambia County, this jury returned a $50 million verdict against James Craig Schultz, Progressive Management of America, Inc., as well as Myrtle Grove Acquisitions, LLC. This case exposed negligence leading up to a 2020 attempted murder at the senior apartment complex in Pensacola. So, Joe, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Hey, good evening. Thanks for having me.
Good evening. So we were talking before the show started a little bit about this case, and it's shocking and horrific enough what happened to the victim in this case, that he was shot 6 times. But it's even bigger than that, and the fact that the environment that was created by a foreign owner of this apartment complex basically set up this recipe for disaster, if you will. Tell us a little bit about this case.
Molly, I didn't have time just prior to this podcast to sort of go into the details, but you're probably going to be shocked when I tell you this. But the story of this case reads like a TV miniseries, maybe. But let me just sort of give you the thumbnail sketch here. So my client was a physical therapist assistant at Baptist Hospital. He and his wife were having issues. To orient you in space, it's the year of Hurricane Sally, July before Hurricane Sally. And it's COVID, and everybody at every hospital was having them, basically put on hazmat suits to work on patients. And he was one of those guys at Baptist. He and his wife were having issues, and basically they decided they were going to split. And so he looked for an apartment that was nearby that he could afford, and he found Myrtle Grove Villas. He moves in around August the 1st. Of 2020, and he's the newest guy there. Okay, it's an apartment complex that caters to 55 years of age or older, and unbeknownst to him, he's placed right next door to a 70-year-old lady who I can only describe as somebody that has probably multiple mental health issues, and on top of that, she's 70 and sex crazed would be an understatement. She is evidently having affairs with the pest control guy. She's having some kind of relationship with the resident manager, who is a defendant in our case. And she propositions grandkids of residents that are 15 years old. She's just out of control, like completely out of control. She has really loud cursing fights with people. There's testimony in the case that she would walk around the apartment complex yelling at herself. Obviously some issues, right? And it happens to be his neighbor, his direct neighbor. Like they share a wall. He's apartment 2, she's apartment 1. So he's trying to be neighborly to her. At the same time, he's trying to keep distance from her because she's constantly propositioning him. And so for the first month he's there, he's basically fending her off. So here comes Hurricane Sally. I'm fast forwarding. I'm leaving out a lot of details because for purposes of brevity, but Hurricane Sally happens in his apartment. Out of all the apartments there, I think there's 36 apartments, gets a pine tree right in the middle of it. So he can't live there anymore. So he's going back. He's staying with a friend that works at the hospital at their house in Perdido Key, and he's going back there every day on the way home to check his mail and check and make sure his apartment is okay, because he couldn't lock it up because the pine tree went through the front door. And so he's doing that every afternoon. And every afternoon he'd sit in his car and try to wait for this woman to go inside before he'd get out of his car. And one day she corners him and basically says to him, I saw you talking to another female here the other day, and you better watch yourself, basically suggesting that they have a relationship, which they don't, right? And he basically gets in her face and is like, look, lady, I just met you. I don't know what you're talking about, but I don't have any kind of relationship with you. In fact, I'm still married and I don't have a relationship with anybody here. And how dare you tell me I can't talk to whoever I was talking to that day? So the next day he comes back to get his mail. She confronts him again at the mailbox. And this time she says, I'm sorry that I did that to you. Unbeknownst to him, she had filed a fabricated sexual assault charge against him.
Wow.
And she was trying to keep him at the apartment complex so she could call the sheriff's office and have them execute the warrant that she fabricated from whole cloth. And so she says to him to get him to stay, I have something, an apology gift for being so weird the other day. Can I just give it to you? Will you come to my apartment door and I'll just hand it to you? He walks to her apartment door, doesn't get anywhere near the threshold. And she says, this is going to go well with the fact that you like heavy metal music. And she starts shooting him.
Oh my God. Wow. And
Yes.
6 times it hit him. She hit him.
Yeah. So he's crawling. The second bullet hits him. The first bullet is his abdomen. The second bullet fractures his right hip joint. So he goes right to the ground and he's trying to crawl away from her as she is shooting him and chasing him to the parking lot. You know, imagine him on the ground, trying to drag himself to his car. And she's just walking behind him, just emptying the gun. So he wakes up, Molly. Here's the kicker. He wakes up and he's arrested, shackled to the bed, wearing an orange jumpsuit because they served the warrant on him, the fabricated sexual assault warrant. They served it on him when he got admitted to the hospital.
Unbelievable.
So he's got guards. He's got guards from the Escambia County Jail. He's wearing an orange jumpsuit. He's in the hospital that he works in, and he's shackled to the bed.
All because of a lie.
All of this because the resident manager was jealous that he and her, according to her, were blossoming some relationship that wasn't even there. So the resident manager thought that this guy was, I guess, going to take his girlfriend away. And so he decided to help her file these charges. So he calls the cops that night and files the sex assault charges. And then the only reason he comes clean is one of the other residents says to him, I've got a text on my phone showing that he wasn't even here that night.
Oh, wow.
And so the resident manager calls the cops and it's like 6 days after this, right? 6 days after the shooting, and says, I need to tell y'all some more stuff. This lady's crazy. She filed sexual assault charges against another resident that were frivolous. She tries to have a relationship with me. She's promiscuous. She's brought her gun to the office. I mean, all this stuff that he didn't tell the cops the night of the sexual assault, right? That he could have, that he didn't. And so at the theme of the case, though, was really not that. The theme of the case was profits over people, because the owner, who lives in the Congo, a French native who spends most of his time in Switzerland, bought this apartment complex and some other apartment complexes in Pensacola as an investment. And he basically slashed the budgets. And he said, no more resident managers. They cost too much. We're just going to take the maintenance guy from one place, have him cover 3 of the apartment complexes, including this one. And he's going to be the manager and the maintenance guy.
That's a horrifying situation. So basically, you're putting somebody who's not trained to handle it. You have a pattern of behavior with this woman in particular who's got doing the same thing over and over again. He's aware of it, and yet he continues to cover up for her, and in fact puts this man in a dangerous situation. So you take this case and you go after this company, and initially they basically ignore you. Actually, before we get to that, Joe, James, our director, was telling me we have a question. James, what's the question?
How is it that the Escambia County folks can arrest someone based on just one side of the story?
Okay, so Joe, did you hear the question?
That's an excellent question. The testimony of the trial was that when it comes to sexual assault, they can do a warrant on one side of the story, which I had no idea that was even possible. But that is possible, and they can do that, and they do that.
Yikes. That's horrifying. Well, thank God there's attorneys like you that will take up the case for somebody who has been falsely accused. So when did they finally start to realize that this was the situation, that he had, it sounds like the Escambia Sheriff's Office really dug in deep and realized that this was not true.
Investigator Alvarez was the robbery homicide investigator for the Sheriff's Office at the time. He's now at UWF, but he was a witness in our case. And he basically said, something didn't seem right from the very beginning. As soon as we talked to this lady the night of the shooting, we knew something was off with her, and she didn't seem right, like mentally. And as the more he dug, the more he found that this can't be true. He talked to all of my clients' coworkers who were like, this is not him. His wife, this is not him. There's no way he did this. Right? He's a gentle, kind, like low-key person. He would never show aggression. Oh, and by the way, he was suffering from erectile dysfunction for the last decade. Not that you can't have sexual assault without that, but it certainly
it's a hindrance.
Mitigates what all you can do, right? So in any event, the police officer that really helped expose this was investigator Eric Alvarez with the Escambia County Sheriff's Office, who's now again with UWF. But to answer your question, that's how it got figured out.
That's wonderful. Yes. And so we were talking before, and we thank you so much for that question. And anybody else that has questions, please weigh in, whether it's for Joe or for us talking about these cases. And Joe is a wealth of information. We have a lot of cases that we've covered here on this show that he's been handling for victims, including Thomas Sheknowski, who is accused of removing Mr. Bryant's liver instead of his spleen. So we're going to talk a little about that too. So just have those questions in mind if you would like, and keep them coming. But on this case with the senior apartment complex incident, at what point did you decide to go after, when you realize the situation that you have a foreign investor who's running this apartment complex on a shoestring budget? It's not being run adequately or safely for the residents. And at one point, I guess, did you see that this was happening and say, this is who needs to be held accountable? They created this situation that led to this nearly deadly incident.
Well, when I got first of all, they didn't want to give me their emails. It took forever. And I finally got a couple of emails, and the guy's basically, telling them, I'm not paying a manager and a maintenance guy to do those two different things. And then the series of questions to the resident manager was, okay, so in 2005, you were making $36,000. And then you worked your way up to like $45,000 in 2018. Why are you you're making less than you made in 2005 in 2020? Why is that? And he said, well, they came to me and they said, you're either fired, or you're going to take $35,000 and you're going to be the resident manager and the maintenance guy for 3 different complexes. And we know you have never done the resident manager job, but you're now going to do it. And he was like, well, it's a job.
Wow.
Okay.
And they don't care. They didn't care that he was not capable of it. Was this person even aware that these potential problems could happen? Do you know if anything bad has happened at any other complexes that this person owns?
Well, the jury didn't know this, but this is the same complex where Naomi Jones was abducted. Aspen Village was one of their apartments. I don't know if you remember the Naomi Jones case.
Yes.
She's a young African-American girl that was abducted from Aspen Village by a resident's boyfriend. And he was from Alabama. He sexually assaulted and killed her. That happened in 2017, 2018. So just prior to this, same management company.
So that was not something that the jury was aware of, but still they didn't need that information to realize that this person was at fault. So what was the case that you presented for them that basically said, hey, this is why you need to hold them accountable? And I thought it was interesting too, before you answered, that they were only going to offer like 350,000, which wouldn't have even been enough to touch this victim's medical bills. And here he is going to suffer
Right.
these physical disabilities for the rest of his life because of these injuries. And they must not take it very seriously. I imagine that you deal with that pretty regularly with some of these,
Yeah.
plaintiff suits. These defendants come in and want to poo-poo you, and then you just come in and say, hey, you can't get away with that.
Insurance companies, they don't want to come off money ever. So, especially when they know they're going to get an instruction from to the jury that basically says the defendant has to foresee criminal conduct.
Okay.
So it knew or should have known that something was going to happen in a criminal fashion. And so they think, okay, well, that's a pretty high bar, right? And so it's not enough to be negligent, right? You got to foresee criminal conduct. And so that was the burden we had to meet. And I guess the defendant looking at that would think, okay, well, he's going to have a tough time proving that under these facts, because the lady never shot anybody before. She never was, quote, violent before, even though she yelled at people and charged at people. She never was per se violent, right? And so they made this argument that, it wasn't reasonably foreseeable.
Interesting. So how did you make them realize that they were responsible, that they could have taken steps to prevent this?
Well, I pointed out the relationship that the manager had with the tenant, right? And whenever you have a personal relationship with a tenant, you pretty much have to throw everything out the window, because what is this person? Do you think this person is going to write her up if she and he are like together, intimately? You think there's going to be accurate reporting to the apartment complex or the management company about what all is going on with her? And they believed the other residents. The other residents were saying this lady's crazy, and they all knew that she was having a relationship with the resident manager, and they would complain to him about her, and he would just like brush them off. I don't want to hear it, kind of thing. And so I think the jury was like, heck yeah, a reasonable and prudent manager who didn't have a relationship with this lady would have done something, right? And then I think the straw that broke the camel's back for them was the evidence that 2 days before the shooting, she came to him and did two things. She wrote a note to him apologizing for something that he threw away, okay, and doesn't remember what it says. And then he admitted that he thought she was going to be violent. Yep.
So it set the
So
stage.
the jury was like, and you didn't go warn him? Like, you didn't go tell him? And he was like, I couldn't find his number. I was like, sir, he just moved in a month and a half before. What do you mean you couldn't find his number? And they had phone conversations during Hurricane Sally too, because his apartment, had this tree through it. And this guy my client's from Michigan. He had never been through a hurricane. So he calls in the middle of the night, or actually Hurricane Sally hit at 5. He calls around 4:30 when this tree comes down, and is like, what do I do? I've never been through this before. And the guy's like, why are you calling me? I can't help you. I'm up in Beulah, wherever he lives. And so they knew he had his number on the 16th. Everybody remembers when Hurricane Sally was. And I was like, so you had the number in your phone on the 16th, and you say you didn't have his number on the 22nd when this lady's making all these allegations, or when the lady's saying she's going to be violent towards him? You can't call and tell him to stay away, right? Call the sheriff's office. You call anybody? Nobody.
Caught him in a lie. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. I know we were talking to before we started the segment, and about a year ago, I had done an investigative report just about how hedge fund companies that are American owned are going around and buying up mobile home parks and other affordable apartments, if you will, too, similar to what this Congo investor, if you will, has done. And they're, like you said, they're looking for places to quote unquote park their money. So they're like, well, this is a good investment. And then the next thing you know, repairs and maintenance are going downhill, rents are getting jacked up, people are getting held to standards for stuff that they're being asked to live in trailers where raccoons are crawling up in the middle of the night out of the hole in the floor, or their AC goes out. We can't have that in Florida. So there's any number of problems, and they just don't really get addressed because these bigger corporations are buying these properties and milking them for all they're worth, and the quality of life goes down for the residents. Is there anything that residents can do other than pursue civil action to protect themselves from terrible things like this?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I guess research into who owns the property, right? If you would have dug down, and most people are not going to do this, right? Uh, but you could find, and these companies are all shell games, right? So Myrtle Grove Acquisitions LLC is owned by American Seagulls Incorporated. American Seagulls Incorporated is a Florida corporation that is owned wholly by this foreign investor. So you'd have to dig, right, through 2 layers of corporate information on Sunbiz to find out, oh, it's owned by somebody that lives in France or that lives in Switzerland or the Congo. I can tell you right now that if your owner is somebody that lives in a different country and is a quote unquote a private investor on Facebook, you probably going to be nothing but an investment opportunity for him.
Right. They don't really care about your quality of life or how your standard of living is. And plus, those are the most vulnerable people to choose. I mean, to pick from as well. If those are going to be your tenants, they're not necessarily going to have the time. They're already barely surviving, a lot of them.
Well, it sounds like it sounds like this guy, Joe, was dealing with some circumstances or life on life's terms and dealt with them in good faith. I mean, it is a senior citizens place there. And basically, a lot of times women will use their feminine wiles to make things crazy, but it sounds like a lot of boundary violations. And like you said, the profits over the people. And that's kind of, and you really can't go ask the other neighbors sometimes. They're not going to tell you.
Right. I know.
I don't even know why that is, but I can't tell you how many apartments I've gotten just by looking around or going, this is near where I want to live.
Right. And it would never occur to me to dive in there and say, oh my gosh, are these people, that own this? Are they going to treat me right?
Yeah.
But it's something to be aware of. And this is a great this case is a great example of just exposing the kind of negligence that can happen when it's not run properly. Hopefully they'll make some changes at this apartment complex. Hopefully this $50 million lesson will be one that they learn. Is that your hope as well, Joe?
My hope is that it's not just this apartment complex, but it's all apartment complexes that have this kind of setup where they have a manager who's basically doing dual roles. I mean, they should be careful with that and make sure that the manager they do put in place has some experience at dealing with tenants, because this guy did not, right? And personalities and knowing where the boundaries are as far as dealing with people. You don't need to get too close to any one tenant ever. Even the appearance of a relationship with a tenant is not good for the apartment complex. So my hope is it helps all of these places. The other thing that's important to know is that this lease said we will not provide any security at all. And so this is a case where you've got basically the company disclaiming any security, right? And then the resident manager basically creating the security issue, right? By his relationship and his ignorance of how to deal with these personal relationships with other tenants, and ignoring the danger that this lady presented.
That's horrific. Well, congratulations on that verdict, and we are certainly happy for the victim that he got some compensation, although it certainly won't.
For sure.
Replace his quality of life. But before we let you go, I know that you're representing victims in a couple of other high profile cases. We've got Shiknovsky. We've got the young man that was killed on the motorcycle by an alleged drunk driver out on Pensacola Beach. And then also the tragedy of the 2 young people that were hit and killed by an off-duty deputy out in Perdido Key. We would love updates on those cases. Perhaps we'll start with Shiknovsky, which is a case that we've covered extensively here on Gulf Coast Confidential. Like we mentioned earlier, he's the surgeon from Destin who operated on Mr. Bill Bryan, and he passed away on the operating table. Walton County Sheriff's Office is still investigating possible criminal charges against that surgeon. But in the meantime, you're still working with his widow, trying to hold the hospital accountable. And where does that case stand? We're in that effort to do that?
So the case right now as it exists is against the doctor and his practice. The hospital actually settled for a confidential amount about a month ago.
Okay.
So that claim is over. for that particular case. We have other cases that involve Shagnosky where the hospital is still a party. But that Mr. Bryan's claims or Miss Bryan's claims on behalf of Mr. Bryan against the hospital are settled for a confidential amount. Now, the real party in interest is the doctor, right? He's the one that in his group. And so they are the focus of this case now. And the only thing that's happened on the civil side is that we've got their motion to dismiss that has not yet been heard. They basically want to dismiss all the claims that are not medical malpractice claims. And their argument is you can't sue us for anything other than medical malpractice claims. And if you could, these don't arise to the level of legal sufficiency to bring these claims against us. And their goal is to try to make it to where they can limit their exposure, because under the medical malpractice caps, non-economic damages are capped at $350,000. So they're trying to take advantage of those caps, and that's what their goal is, right? And my goal is to make sure that we bring all the claims that the law supports.
Absolutely. And that's one of those issues that you and I've talked about before. In fact, when I was investigating some other allegations of basically medical malpractice with some high profile physician cases here locally, we talked about how Florida laws essentially cut these doctors in a break and make it harder for victims to hold people accountable if they have done something wrong. Can you talk a little bit about some of those laws? I mean, in the legislature, we almost, except the governor refused to sign it, almost passed a bill that would have essentially eliminated Florida's so-called free kill law, which puts limitations on who can sue on behalf of someone. Fortunately, in this situation for the Beverly Bryan, the widow of Mr. Bryan, she was married to him, but had they not been married per se, or if they, didn't have kids that were of a certain age, she could not have pursued it, because Florida law essentially says your life has no value unless somebody's depending on you for a living, is the way I read it.
That's correct. So you have to have a surviving spouse or a minor child is defined as a child under 26. If you don't have one of those and you die from medical malpractice, you do not have a claim that's worth pursuing. So that's one of the limitations. The other limitations are if they admit that they are liable in the pre-suit phase, which is another hurdle. So you have to go through, unlike every other lawsuit in Florida where you can sue basically anybody else besides doctors and hospitals. You could sue me, for instance. You could sue, any driver without doing a pre-suit. But doctors have to go through what's called a pre-suit period before you're allowed to sue them. And that pre-suit period is basically a mini litigation where within 90 days, sometimes it takes longer, you basically have to show them everything you got. You have to show them your expert and what your expert's going to say. And they have the option after 90 days to admit liability, deny liability, or demand arbitration. Demanding arbitration is the same thing as admitting liability to them. If they do that, they get to cap their non-economic damages at $350,000.
Unbelievable. So yeah, it's automatically set up to where the victim has to fight to get heard, essentially, or to get any kind of justice, is what it sounds like to me.
Correct.
Yeah, and victim blaming. I can't help it, Joe. I have to always reach back when we talk about Dr. Shagnosky. What in the world goes on with Dr. Heekins?
The Heekins, the guy from Jacksonville.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't handle that case, but he sounded like he was a mess. He had dementia, I guess, and he was basically operating on the wrong side of the body and leaving instruments in people. And the hospital, which was an Ascension facility over in Jacksonville, Florida, was basically ignoring all these adverse reports coming from this doctor and let him continue operating. I think he ended up with 300 lawsuits against him by patients that had some complication that they shouldn't have had because he was allowed to continue operating there when he didn't even know like where he was some days. So that was an example of the kind of negligent credentialing that hospitals are allowed to do, how broken their system of reporting is. Nurses are expected to report these doctors, but at the same time, if they report somebody, they get in trouble. So it's like, okay, wait a minute. This system is set up to do what now? You're relying on the nurses to make anonymous reports in a computer system that they have to sign into.
Right.
So it's like, how anonymous is this system when they have to log in to this to file the complaint, right?
Right.
Or to make a report. But anyway, that's Dr. Heekin over in Jacksonville, and of course they settled those cases a long time ago. But
Yeah, that's fascinating though to me that you included that in the lawsuit about Mr. Bryan, because it does an example of the culture that can happen when, like you said before, in the case of the apartment complex, it's profits over people. It's amazing to me that they could afford to keep someone who was facing 300 lawsuits
or
for
more.
or more, plus 300 plus lawsuits. Like there's that much money to be made in it that you can afford to be
Right.
sued that many times.
Well, that's what makes me wonder. $50 million will pay for a lot of managers. You know, it's like they're just rolling the dice. And I know corporate America, a lot of times they've got people that crunch numbers and figure stuff out and everything. And they go, okay, it's going to take 15 people to run this company. Here are 12. You know, that is how they do.
Right.
And then
they hop over to an apartment complex and run that too.
Yeah. And then that person makes a mistake because they're not competent to handle that job, or a manager has to have a whole different level of skills than, say, somebody doing maintenance.
Absolutely.
You know? So that, like I said, you can buy a lot of management for $50 million. So I think it's like a cautionary tale.
Well, and it's a cautionary tale too, as well. And this is why I appreciate your time, Joe, and talking about some of this. I think a lot of times until somebody's been injured or has someone that they love be injured through no fault of their own, whether it's medical malpractice or an accident, which we're going to talk about some of those cases that you're representing too, they don't realize how complex it is, and that a lot of these laws are not necessarily designed to help them. You know, when you talk about being a pro-business state, what that often means is we're going to make sure we line the pockets of people who provide the jobs, and we're going to turn the other way when they're treating people terribly or putting people in danger, is the way I take it.
Well, the stockholders are, I just know corporate America. A lot of times it's the stockholders. And being a pharmacist, a lot of times they'll say, well, they're a great pharmacist. They can fill 150 scripts an hour. I'm like, you're terrible if you're doing that. You're not even looking at them 30 seconds, you know. But that is where we are sometimes. It has to be metriced and measured. And
right.
So,
because it has to be about profit, not
right.
necessarily the service.
Yeah. And that's bad.
Well, Joe, let's talk a little bit about another high-profile case that we've had here locally, and this was tragic. Miss Ann Passman Killow was driving her BMW SUV out at Pensacola Beach. This was, I guess, in June, just not even a month ago now, and it's just horrible. According to FHP, they said that she hit a motorcyclist, a young man from Texas, 28 years old, and drug him, that he was partially up underneath her vehicle. She's since pleaded not guilty to that case, but you're representing the family of the victim, I understand?
that's right. Scout Anderson was the gentleman on the motorcycle. His pregnant wife, Demi, is my client. And of course, they were newly married, a couple of months, very young couple. And she's, you know, like 6 months pregnant. And of course, it's devastating, right? You know, he was doing everything correctly. This lady who had been drinking allegedly at the Shaker gets behind the wheel of her car, which she probably done numerous times in her life because she lives at Regency Tower. And I understand she's a regular at the Shaker. And so maybe, you know, she'd done this hundreds of times and didn't come across anybody at 4 o'clock in the morning or 3 o'clock in the morning. And this night she did, unfortunately, and she didn't realize it for 404 feet or something.
Wow.
While she drug him. His motorcycle looked like a hood ornament by the time she was done with it, right? It was like encased around the motorcycle. The hood was encased around the motorcycle and it looked like he was actually grabbing the motorcycle. She hit it so hard. And then the charging document said she was going 115 miles an hour on Via de Luna, which I don't know how you do that with the speed bumps, but she somehow was doing that. And at impact, the ECM, the electronic control module, says she was going 96 at impact.
I had no idea that she was accused of speeding that fast. Like, to your point, like, what's the purpose, and how do you even pull that off? So he didn't even have time, it sounds like, to even, by the time he saw her coming up in his rearview mirror, if he saw her at all, he barely had time. He would not have had time to get out of the way, is what it sounds like.
115 miles an hour on Via de Luna. I can't even imagine what that looks like.
No, what a nightmare. So, you know, without, I guess, getting too much into the details, or however much you feel comfortable sharing, what's your approach to a case like this? You're just trying to see if there's something, that other steps that could have been taken that would have prevented this on the part of, you know, other folks.
Yes, other folks. Yeah, bars, right?
Yeah,
folks.
So we're going to obviously look at Miss Killow, right, first, and she's certainly going to be a defendant. And then if there is some potential liability for the bar, whichever bar that is, if it's the shaker, if it's some other bar, whatever, we will look into that. But Florida's dram shop law is extremely difficult because the only thing bigger than the medical industry in the state of Florida is tourism, right? So bars and restaurants have very favorable laws when it comes to this issue. And basically, to hold a bar responsible for over serving someone, you have to prove that they knew the person and they knew the person had a habitual addiction to alcohol.
Like, how do you do that?
You do it by showing somebody that somebody's a regular, right? And that they were able to drink a lot without showing a lot of outward signs of being intoxicated, because only people that have the habit of drinking a lot can mask the effects of alcohol. And so basically you have to show that somebody and the bar knew it, that somebody went there enough and drank enough there to where they knew or should have known that they were habitually addicted to alcohol.
That's interesting. Are those cases, you mentioned they're difficult to prove. So are you aware of any that they win taking that approach? Like that you can show that there's this pattern of behavior and that they knew or should have known?
So if you think about this in the form of tourism, you're never going to have a case against a tourist, right? Because by definition, tourists don't regular these places. So if you think about it, the law was meant to protect these bars and restaurants from getting sued when somebody's on spring break and they get drunk and they kill somebody, right? But we just got oral argument granted in another case against the Floribama, where my client was coming home from work, Miss Lirio, again on Perdido Key Drive, and Billy Bowman, who was a bartender at another restaurant, was visiting his girlfriend and another friend that worked. They're both bartenders at the Floribama around in March of I think it was 2022, and he ended up killing my client on Perdido Key Drive, not far from this other accident that happened with the off-duty sheriff deputy a couple weeks ago. So, but we got summary judgment was granted against us in that case, and the appellate court for the first DCA last week during trial issued an opinion that they want to hear oral argument on the issues. So, fingers crossed, we might be able to convince the appellate court to send it back to the trial court.
Absolutely. Well, we would love to get an update on that. But, speaking of Perdido Key, and you mentioned that fatal accident on July 7th, where an off-duty Escambia sheriff's deputy was the driver who struck and killed two pedestrians who were trying to cross the road and on that, holiday weekend. And then you were saying that the family of one of the victims has retained you to take a look at this case.
Yeah, the female victim's family. And so obviously all we know at this point is that these kids were crossing the street at or near a crosswalk, and an off-duty Escambia County Sheriff's deputy who I hear was working at the Floribama in an off-duty, extra-duty capacity, either was distracted by an ambulance that was headed in the other direction or didn't see them for some reason because it was dark. And he hit two of these 20-year-old kids and killed both of them. So, the facts are still in flux because we don't have any documents from this yet. No reports, no information really, other than, and we don't even have the name, I don't believe, of the off-duty officer. We just know he was an off-duty officer.
Yes, same here. I would not receive that information either, but that is tragic. I mean, especially I think about my daughter's only 13. Hopefully she's not out there partying at the Bama or whatever, but I do worry about that. You think these kids are just out there grown enough to handle it. And, they were crossing, like you said, we don't really know what the situation was, if they were crossing at a crosswalk, how dark it was, what the situation was. But I think a lot of times people are under the impression that personal injury attorneys are just out there to try to make a buck and taking advantage of what is a pure accident, if you will. But again, I feel like there's just a lot that people don't know. And that's why you have to look into it. Was there something that could have been done to prevent it? Was somebody, a lot of questions that you have to answer to determine, was this truly an accident, pure, if you will, or was there something that could have been done that could have prevented this? Was there, a situation? Are we seeing a lot of fatal accidents, for example, out there? Are there not enough crosswalks? Is it not enough? Is it not lit enough? Those are the kind of questions that go through my mind, you know.
Those are good questions. And then I get to thinking too, I'm old enough where they were like, watch out for the other guy, well, you can watch out for them all you want to, and sometimes things happen even if you're not doing something. And in this day of Uber and Lyft and all that, you're really having to depend on everybody else to do the right thing, which they're not going to do.
That's right. So, Joe, what would you recommend to folks if they're looking for a personal injury attorney? You handle all kinds of cases when it comes to, injuries, whether it's medical malpractice, these fatal accidents. Why should people call a personal injury attorney, even if they may or may not think they have a case? There's just saying things I feel like that people may not realize that their rights may have been violated, but there's a lot of questions that that probably need to be answered that they wouldn't even be aware of. Why should they call you?
Well, call me or call anybody else that's competent. But at the end of the day, if you end up with a permanent injury, which Florida law for car wreck cases, at least, you don't even have a claim unless you have a permanent injury diagnosis, right? So that was one of the tort reforms that happened a while ago before even I was practicing here. But basically, you can't even sue the other driver in the state of Florida unless you have a permanent injury diagnosis. So if you do have a permanent injury from a car wreck, do you not want to get compensated for that? I mean, it seems a little crazy not to, right?
Mm.
If somebody else is at fault for causing you to have a permanent injury, seems like you should get compensation for that. But anyway, that would be my 2-minute soapbox on why you should call a lawyer to see if you have a case, right? Now, if you don't end up with a permanent injury, which we have clients that end up with clean MRIs and they don't have a permanent injury, we're like, okay, it's over. So we're done with you. We're moving on to another case. This is not something that we think you should continue. So take your couple $1,000 they probably would have paid you anyway and sign a release, and let's move down the road.
Absolutely. Well, I think that pretty much wraps it up for us on this part of the segment of the deep dive. Joe, any final thoughts or anything else that you think would be important to add on any of these cases that we discussed tonight, or anything that you have coming up?
No, I appreciate. I've got another jury trial in 2 weeks, so I look forward to. I've been covering those with social media because I really want the public to see the civil justice system working, and so I formed a LLC that's separate from the law firm that actually covers my trials, other lawyers that handle civil jury trials here locally. Defendants for years have asked for confidentiality clauses, right? And they pay for these confidentiality clauses for a reason. They don't want any of their negligence exposed, right? I think the public should know about the dangers associated with different people in their community and companies. And I don't see that there's any problem with that, right? Neither do the courts. The problem is you as a lawyer cannot bias a potential juror by anything you say. So you got to be very careful how you talk and what you talk about, and making sure that you would never say anything that wouldn't that the jury would never hear, right? Or intentionally try to poison the jury. You just want to come across as like, look, today I had a conversation with a defense lawyer who filed a motion to gag me for this malpractice case coming up. And I said to him, why don't you do the video with me? Why don't you give the defendant's defense? I'll give the plaintiff allegation, and we can both sort of not debate anything that won't come in, but just talk in general terms about what the trial is going to be like, right? That way, it's not just me giving both sides, which I'm trying to do now.
Right.
So, of course, I don't know if he's going to do that or not, but I'd like him to. It'd be great.
Well, that's fascinating. It's almost like you're going to be the court TV of civil law. I like the concept. I mean, that's a great idea, because as a reporter, it is all about making information that's available to people so that they know what their rights are. They know, like you said, who the people are in their community who are accused or potentially have even been convicted of dangerous behavior. I mean, I'm glad to know about this apartment complex, and I appreciate your marketing director Mackenzie sending out a press release letting us know, because one, as a reporter, it's news that I think people need to know, and two, if I'm a renter, or if I'm somebody in this community, if I have a loved one that's looking for a place to live, I want to make sure that they're going to be in a place where they're going to be safe and they're going to be taken care of. Or if they're looking for a doctor to perform a surgery of some kind, then I want them to know what their background is. And I do feel like, Joe, that's something you and I have talked about before. So much of this information that should be public record and is supposed to be public record, they make you ask for it and dig for it and all but beg and crawl on your hands and knees for it. And it shouldn't be that hard for people to get access to information, especially here in the Sunshine State, where public records laws we have some of the best in the country, and even still, and yet they act like, well, we don't really want to part ways with this.
Causing trouble.
Yeah. So thank you so much for what you're doing with Zarzaur Law and
Thank you.
representing victims. So we appreciate you taking time to be on Gulf Coast Confidential's Deep Dive tonight.
Thank y'all for doing it.
Thank you, Joe.
All right. We'll see you later, Joe. Thank you.
Bye now.
Well, that was wonderful.
Yes, it
Appreciate
was.
having him on there and talking about some of those cases that have been talkers in the community as well. So we'll continue to follow up and see what happens.
Right.
We have another case that we cover a lot here on Gulf Coast Confidential. In fact, it's how Pam and I met. And she had reached out to me about the murder at the time of her sister Sharon Adelot by her son, then 17-year-old Brandon Adelot. He was charged with murder, but he was found not guilty by reason of insanity. So in the eyes of the law, he is not a murderer, but he is a killer. And even though he was found not guilty by reason of insanity, he is working his way through the system, and if you will, which is legal. And he had been at the Department of Children and Families, Florida State Hospital for years. And then they recently recommended in the past year or so that he be released to a group home. But however he's progressing, every 6 months this case comes up for evaluation, basically to do a progress report and see how he's doing. So Brandon will be back in court tomorrow via Zoom in Santa Rosa County. And Pam, I know you always want to be there at these court hearings because that was your baby sister who he killed, and that was his mother, but that was your baby sister,
Right.
and your sister Trisha's sister as well. And there's the two of you. There's Sharon.
Yeah.
I do dig the 80s styles. I
That was the
remember all
80s.
that. For sure. But yeah, so let's talk a little bit about that, and this is tough. And it's another reason why we do victim advocacy, if you will, on this show, is because it's not necessarily that you want to take the side of the victim. It's just that they're often not heard because in the criminal justice system, it does become about the defendant, if you will, the
Right.
perpetrator and what their rights are and aren't.
Mhm.
And in this case, I think you feel like your sister's been marginalized and gets forgotten and left behind, all on behalf of whether it's intentional or unintentional or apathy on the part of the law. The law says she's gone, he's here. We're worried about his rights, not hers so much anymore. But you want to speak on her
Oh,
behalf.
yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, he took her rights. He had no right for that, And also, I think about it, most of us have not been in the criminal justice system. And a lot of us haven't been in the civil justice, like with Joe there. I learned a lot there just sitting here. And when you get in something like that, it's at the worst possible moment. I feel like, and I pray to God, I've lived my worst day of my life already. I couldn't think of anything worse than to know that. And I trust the police. I trust prosecution. I trust the system. But when we got in it, it was like being on a tilt-a-whirl and thrown out because I say this all the time and I'm never going to quit saying it, that Bill Edens, the state attorney at the time, told us that Brandon would never get out. He killed his mother, for heaven's sakes. Sharon and Brandon loved Sharon and Sharon loved him, and so for this to happen, to be told by a phone call, Pam, don't say anything, just listen, Sharon's dead and Brandon killed her. That's exactly what we heard on Christmas Eve, 2013. So we've been dealing with this since then. I've never had to grieve anybody out of order or for something so horrendous or what have you. So I'm still not right from that day. I still am not right. I'm trying my best, but learning how to do things and talk to someone like you and have an advocacy and stuff. But right at the beginning, with this going on, I've never heard of not guilty by reason of insanity. I'd only heard of insanity defense. And I don't, I know the words not guilty were not said to me because I know me. I would not allow that because Brandon, that's my nephew right there, he admitted it. He said he killed Sharon Hill, not Sharon Adelot, his mother. And he felt like he did the right thing and that he was smirking and smiling when he did it.
Right. And he was diagnosed with schizophrenia. But so many of these cases, there are certainly medical diagnoses, and you can find that in any criminal case, really. You can find there's a diagnosis. That's the reason why people commit crimes sometimes. And I think the standard is, were they aware of their behavior? So in this one doctor's opinion, they were not aware. But what's interesting to me, whether it's this case or so many others, you can hire anybody you want to say whatever you want anymore.
Oh, yeah.
So I think that's really part of your frustration.
It is.
Because when you're talking to the state attorney's office, they'll say, well, this is the law. We're just following the law. And this is what the doctor said. This is what, but I mean, the bigger picture too, because I've sat through a lot of these hearings with you, and I sat there when DCF was saying, well, we've evaluated him. We feel like he's ready to move to a group home. We've evaluated him. We feel like he's ready for this. We don't feel like he's ready for that. They're late a lot.
Mhm.
You're just sitting there twiddling your thumbs, wondering when they're going to come on. They're eating lunch when they're talking
Mhm.
about it. And when you think about the crime itself and how horrific it was, he stomped her, he beat her. There was no argument. It was initially reported that there was an argument. There was no argument. He went over there with a knife hidden up the sleeve of his shirt and he started stabbing her as soon as she opened the door. She was getting ready to go to a Christmas party, take him to a Christmas party and go to church. She was going to take Brandon as well as, their younger daughter, her
Mhm.
younger daughter. So you compare that to the fact that, now it's a done deal. He's been found not guilty by reason of insanity. He's working his way through the system. And you got somebody that's smacking down their tuna fish sandwich going, yeah, he's fine. We think
Mhm.
he's better. He's
Yeah.
taking his Benadryl and his
Mhm.
drugs pretty regularly. So we think he's good.
Mhm.
It's this, whether he's good or not, is this feeling of, is this a professional
Mhm.
system? Are
Mhm.
people taking this seriously? Hell, we've been
Mhm.
waiting an hour for you to show
Yeah.
up because you forgot that the date was
Right,
today.
right. And a lot of times on there too, I mean, they've sent me a letter that said, Miss Hill, your son, he is not my son. He's my sister's son, and he killed her. And then on and on and on, more stuff like that. This is the Department of Children and Family. These are not judges. These are not learned attorneys. These aren't people. But I've been an expert witness before many, 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 many times. And, it's no big deal. Whichever side hires you, that's the way that they find somebody that leans like that with them. And for him to say he feel like he did the right thing and that he's, smirking and smiling, and he was on Spice, that little bunch over there that, that's what he was doing.
And it was legal back then. And we have since, and I interviewed a counselor. We've actually had him on one of our
Mhm.
deep dive segments, that he talked about how there was a special unit that was created for people who had been using and abusing spice because it does have all these terrible chemicals in it. They call it synthetic marijuana, but
Mhm.
basically they
Yeah.
just take grass clippings and spray insecticide and whatever other chemicals they can, Drano they can get on there, and it rewires your brain,
Mhm.
messes up your brain. And he was saying that the symptoms definitely emulate schizophrenia and other psychosis, but they
Mhm.
don't respond to psychotic drugs.
Right. And Brandon wouldn't take his drugs down there, and he doesn't on the regular. He may be taking them now, but I'm not willing to take a chance. He killed my sister when he had a charmed life and everything was wonderful. There was no argument there. Brandon stabbed her the second she opened the door. He left 2 knives in her eyes. My sister was unrecognizable as a person, much less a woman.
I know your friend had to identify
Yeah,
her by her
by her
hands.
hands. And even the first responder that came, Patrick, I kept bugging you going, I want to meet him, want to meet him, want to meet him. And you helped me find him. And, just to know that person knelt down by my sister. Sharon's bitter ex-husband found her, went out in the yard, starts rolling around and going, my son, my son. He knew that. And it's just all this going on. And to say he'll never get out, I took that as the truth. I took those words as the truth from him. And I will, like I said, always keep saying that, because not guilty by reason of insanity, that's one thing our state of Florida doesn't have. Guilty by reason of insanity. When someone sits up there and told you, yeah, I slit her throat, I stabbed her in the stomach, I beat her with a baseball bat till her jaw fell off and her teeth were across the room on the credenza. And the reason I want to tell people this is tomorrow that we're going. And this is one step closer to him getting out. And if he did that to Sharon during a charmed life, and she's the one that loved him the most, I mean, I can't even tell you. I would have to sit down and reread this stuff because I've had to block a lot of it, because like I can't even use a knife in my own house half the time.
Right.
And trying to get through grief. Every time we try to get somewhere, there's competency trials and stuff. We had to establish the bar for competency is that's your lawyer, you're charged with this, and that's the judge. He couldn't establish that for 3 years. And then all of a sudden now, here we are. I am scared to death for anybody in any community where Brandon is going to be, especially the people that loved him.
Absolutely. And is there anything that you would want people to know about this case or about the hearing tomorrow? That would just be important for you to mention?
Yeah. I would like people to know that this can happen to you too. And I'd like for people to know that we need to push back and change the law if there's a not guilty by reason of insanity, there needs to be a guilty by reason of insanity. And in 2018, something called Marcy's Law came into effect. And this happened with my sister in 2013. And we always feel like you're begging or pleading or you're the terrible people because you have to talk about this ugly stuff. Well, Marsy's Law came into effect, and that is to make sure that is that is the Sixth Amendment of the Florida state, of our state of Florida. And that is to make sure that victims have at least equal rights and protections and notifications that the killer or defendant or rapist or whomever. And I'm thinking to myself, about damn time, because I do see an uptick in trend. And, the Idaho 4, this has nothing to do with Sharon, but the Brian Kohlberger, where he killed Ethan and Madison and Xana and Kaylee. We have to search hard for those folks' names that there was a plea deal made on their behalf, and half of those families are upset about it and stuff.
You relate a lot to especially the father of one of those
I
daughters.
do, yes, that Kaylee's daddy, and he just, it's not. It is our life. Sharon is not here anymore. She's gone, and I can't get her back. But you're not going to keep sullying her name and reputation, and we need to say our loved ones' names. And by the way, I like for people to know that when someone is grieving, it feels nice for someone to say their name. Even if we cry, it feels nice.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Even if we just lose someone through natural reasons, that's not a violent crime. I mean, both of my parents are gone. I love it when I get to talk to family members about
EDB.
them. Yeah, EDB, BJ Barrows.
Yeah.
I love it because
Yeah.
you get to hear their names again. But I think that's a big part of it too. People are grieving, and it clouds your judgment. It makes it hard to make a decision, and especially if you're not familiar with the criminal justice system or even the civil law system, that piled on with whatever you're dealing with, whether it's physical injuries, emotional injuries, grief. It's just a lot. And that's one of the reasons that we do this show and we try to do these deep dives, is to address some of those issues. God forbid that should happen to anyone, but we all deal with problems and trials and tribulations and grief, maybe not to an extreme scale, but enough to say, hey, there's help out there. There are people that will listen. Here's how you navigate the system. And one of the big things that you advocate for is the victim's impact statement.
Oh, I love those victim impact statements. If you ever have the chance to do a victim impact statement, even if it's at sentencing or what have you, if you do not do it, you will regret it. I promise you. But you will never regret, even if you just get up there and go, "Hi, Sharon was my sister and I loved her," or anything. And I'll have to give Judge Simon a lot of love, because he listened to me tell him about Sharon, and he even related to me that he had lost his mother, and he understood that was important to me. But the victim impact statement, if we don't, it's like what Joe was saying too with civil, if we do not lean into these things where people are victimizing us and we don't push back and go, that's not right, murder's not right, this is just not right at all. So my sister's very last words, and her killer told you and me what it was, and it was help. And that's what I have told myself I'm going to do: help my family as much as I can, and any other family as much as I can.
Well, Pam, thank you so much. And I appreciate you sharing that with us tonight. And we'll, of course, follow up and see what happens on the hearing tomorrow. And if he's going to remain in the group home, or if there's going to be another decision that's recommended beyond that, we'll continue to follow it as we always have. And we appreciate you joining with us, and hope to see you next time on our deep dive, or just one of our regular conversations here on Gulf Coast Confidential, one of our regular podcast episodes. I'm your host, writer, and producer for this show, Molly Barrows, with co-host and researcher Pam Hill, and a big thanks as always to our director, editor, and production engineer, James Roy. None of this would happen without him. We hope you enjoyed listening, and that you will continue to listen and like and subscribe wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Check out Gulf Coast Confidential. Have a great night, y'all. We'll see you next time.
Bye.